Hello everybody, my name is Stuart and welcome to another build guide video. Today we're going to be building the Woozi, a design by Woody. The Woozi is a fully automatic, sturdy and reliable electric blaster. It takes Talon magazines and is basically compatible with any dart, and it is available in both single stage and dual stage setups. The Woozi's a really impressive blaster. It's definitely given me a run for my money at some Nerf events, and it's just simply very good. I highly recommend it, and I say that about everything, but it's for good reason. We're going to be building the Woozi from start to finish, and I'm going to walk you guys through the build process. What we have in front of us here is all of the printed parts for the Woozi, as well as all of the hardware for the Woozi. You can purchase on our website the printed parts set, or you can purchase the hardware kit if you have your own printer, or you could purchase the entire DIY kit, and you could have everything that you see here in front of you, everything you see here in front of you, and you can follow along with this build guide. The Woozi is, I would say, a medium to high difficulty blaster. It's not ridiculously hard to build by any means, but it does have its parts that are a bit of a challenge, and you'll see those as we go. So keep that in mind. If you have built electric blasters before, this one's probably a step up, but definitely not too far off and doable. A little bit about me. I've been working here at Frontline Foam for over 1.5, coming on 2 years here soon, and I have a pretty decent amount of experience. I've built a lot of blasters here, especially electric ones. Now, that doesn't mean I'm perfect. I'm still learning about the Woozi. The Woozi's relatively new here at Frontline Foam. So anything that you see while you're building yours that you want to change or you want to do differently, go for it. If you have some sort of expertise that you can apply, do so, and it'll really help you out. So just keep that in mind. And long story short, if you guys follow along, you should have yourself a darn good fully automatic electric blaster at the end of it that's going to serve you really well. So let's get started. Throughout this guide, I'm going to be referring to lots of parts, and there's just one quick thing I wanted to clarify. When I say motor screw, I mean these teeny tiny motor screws. They're different from the rest, obviously. And then there are these shell screws, is what I call them. This one is the longest. You should have a few of these. These are 12mm shell screws, or full-length shell screws. These are 10mm shell screws, so this one's almost full length, and then we have what we call half-length shell screws. So they'll be used in different spots of the blaster. It'll help if you make sure to set aside your long ones as well as your short ones. Just kind of keep them separate so you know which ones to use when. Just keep that in mind. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to take this part, the cage, and I'm going to prepare it. I'm going to put the motors in the cage. We are going to be building a single stage Woozi, meaning that there's only going to be one pair of flywheels, or one stage, that fling the darts. You can, of course, very easily get a dual stage hardware kit. The advantage of a dual stage is you get higher performance, of course, you get higher velocities, and especially over sustained automatic fire, your darts hold higher velocities through that sustained fire better than a single stage. But single stage does work just fine. What I like to do to these cages is I like to take this little pick and just poke through these holes and make sure that they're clear. I don't need to do these ones because I'm not even going to be putting motors there, but if you are, I recommend checking those. I'm going to take this file and I'm just looking down here into these holes, and I can tell that there's a little bit of gunk kind of from overhang in the printer. I like to kind of just rub the file around to get any of the particularly obstructive, I think that's the word, obstructive, bits of plastic out. That should really do the trick just fine. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to slide these motors into these spots. Now these are pretty tight today. Prints may vary, of course, but I'm going to take this one and putting the red dot on top here. I'm going to just push that in. Notice the red dot, holding it like so with the curve on the left. That motor's going to sit like that. I'm going to push it in as best as I can. That looks like it's in all the way. And this other one, the red dot is on top here. I'm going to put the red dot on the bottom on this side and push this guy in. Very good. I'm going to flip this over, and what I'm not going to do is I'm not just going to set it straight on the table. These tabs bend pretty easily, and I don't want to bust those. So I like to use these little prints that we have. We use these for a lot of our flywheel blasters. It's technically called like a Mark 8 pigeon tab protector or something. I like to just set these under because they distribute the pressure away from the tabs. It's a little weird to get in place, but the point is that it's there, so if I do end up having to push on them, it's okay. Now I'm going to take some thread locker, and I'm just going to put a dot in each of these holes. Thread lock is not entirely required, but we definitely recommend it because with all the vibration in these blasters, the motor screws can actually come loose, which will give you some issues later. Now I'm going to take my 4 motor screws and thread them through these holes and into the motors. You're going to have to push down a little bit likely, and you're going to have to really pay attention and make sure that the motor screws actually thread into the motors properly. You don't want to cross thread them. Make sure you're applying some straight down pressure there. And we're going to do this for all 4. As for the tightness, we want these to be pretty well hand tight. When we feel them snug up, we want to keep going until we can tell that they're in there all the way. I don't really know how else to describe that, but as you pay attention to what you feel as you tighten these down, you should be able to feel the right spot. And remember, just as tight as you can get it with your hands, no more than that for sure. Alright, I just wiped off the excess thread lock, and now I'm going to slap on these worker wheels. These go on very easily. You just put them on top and you push them straight on. It shouldn't take a ridiculous amount of pressure, and you should be able to feel them kind of bottom out, and that's how you know that they're on. And you should be able to spin them like so. And this is what we want to do to the cage for now. If you are doing a dual stage, the way you will put the rest of the motors in will be exactly like these two, just over here. So that means that this motor is going to look like this, and this motor is going to look like this. Next, we're going to take these parts, and this is going to be the pusher motor assembly, we'll call it. I'm going to have a look at this piece, and this motor is going to fit into this slot here, but already, that's going to be a tight fit. And the reason being is because we have some gunk left over from the printer there. So I'm going to quickly take a file to this and clean it up and then set the motor in there. It actually does not matter which way we place the motor in this spot, because either way it spins, the pusher is still going to work properly. Now this is a pretty snug fit, and that's okay. Just making sure not to push on those tabs as I get everything into its place. Alright, so I got my motor all the way seated. I actually, because it was a tight fit, I actually had to take a hammer and gently tap it in from the back, but I was always making sure that any force I applied to the back of this motor was applied to this circle here. That's where the force is best distributed. So now that we've got the motor in there, we are going to secure it with 2 motor screws and some Loctite. Getting ahead of myself. As you can see, there are 2 holes here and here. We are simply just going to put a dot of Loctite here, and then there, and then 2 more motor screws, just like the ones in the cage. Alright, we've got those tightened down. Now, if I take this spinner thing, and if I spin it around here, we shouldn't feel it getting caught on the head of this screw here. This is likely not going to be a large issue, but if we do find that continues to be a problem in any way later, we'll just have to make sure we tighten down this screw a little more to make more room for this guy to spin. So, what I'm going to do is I set this guy here, and this cap-looking piece is going to fit through it, and then we're going to secure it from the back with 4 shell screws. But before I put it together completely, I'm actually going to apply a little bit of lubricant. This is the lubricant that we like to use. And I'm not going to go crazy. I'm just going to put a little bit there and a little bit on the cap looking pieces I called it earlier. And just kind of get things spread. Because we want this piece to glide very easily with very little resistance, if at all, if any, later. So, got all these bits in place. Things are spinning okay, very good. Now I can put my finger on the back of this and I can kind of spin the middle piece around and I can see that the holes are lined up. Now I'm going to take my 10mm shell screws, the normal length ones, and I'm just going to put 4 in the back here. Alright, so we have all 4 screws in the back, and we can still spin this piece around. Ours doesn't perfectly glide. Every so often it might feel a bit of resistance here, but that's not looking like it's going to be the end of the world. We'll have to see how things go, and we'll make corrections later if needs be. Now, here we have our worm gear, and we here at Frontline Foam, we actually like to use just half of the worm gear. We found that it tends to be a bit more reliable. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to take my knife. I'm going to look at the middle there. And actually cut it in half. And the half that I want to use is the half that's kind of capped off. Now this bit is going to slide directly over the motor shaft, just like that. So now when the motor spins crazy fast, which it will later, it's going to spin this big wheel crazy fast as well. So make sure that you get it onto the shaft a decent amount, and make sure that there is a decent amount of connection between the teeth of the gears here. And now what we want to do as a precaution is simply add some lubricant to the teeth. So that way later when things get all started, it will have less resistance and overall just less friction. This is if you aren't careful, this can be a common failure point for this entire, for the Woozi. A common failure point is back here in the pusher motor. So we just want to be extra careful. Not going absolutely crazy with the lube, because too much lube can actually slow it down. We just want to put enough so that way the parts experience, particularly the motor and worm gear, experience very little resistance. Now, this pusher with this knob pointing down is going to fit on top. And then this cover simply slides on. And you'll see that these 2 holes line up and these 2 holes line up. I am going to take a half-length screw and put one here and here. Okay, so we've got our pusher motor assembly all put together now. And it's okay that this is sticking out the front, because when it turns on, it's going to go back and everything, so that's totally fine. We've got everything closed up. We're going to save these for later, but we have these 2 screws tightened down on top. So there's that, looking good. Okay, so I just finished fiddling with this piece for a bit. As you can see, I soldered on these quick attachments, so that way I could plug it into a battery and see how it was functioning. But I ended up having to do some troubleshooting because, frankly, this little box can be one of the most troublesome parts of the Woozi. And I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit and walk you through a few of the troubleshooting steps that I took to help it work better. One thing that I did is I had this worm gear, and they can be half, but I found that actually you can have better results if you use about 2/3 of it and you use the first 2/3 of the worm gear. Additionally, there was some filing that had to be done of the inside of this loop here, as well as some filing of the actual peg, because it was a bit stiff. The movement of the peg in this groove was a bit stiff, so it needed just some cleaning up so that way things glided a little smoother. And then finally, we had to remove the elephant's foot along this edge here and here to help it fit into this channel a little better. basically I had to take a moment and really review and see where things were rubbing, because the truth is, with this piece, we want to eliminate as much friction as possible, and that is through use of lubricant, but also isolating individual points points in which parts interact with one another, and making sure that those work smoothly. So, with this cover on, we also noticed that there was some rubbing of the pusher on the roof of this cover, so it did require a little bit of lubricant on top here. And then finally, beyond that, we actually took out 2 of the screws on the bottom. You don't need 4. We ended up taking out these 2 on the bottom to loosen the grip of this center peg, like axle thing, so that way the gear could spin smoother. Now, I know all this troubleshooting wasn't filmed, of course, but I'm hoping that my, at the very least, oral description of what kind of troubleshooting I did can help you to get yours working. In all, though, you do want to be careful not to overburden your pusher while it's not in the blaster, because if we do plug this in straight into a battery, do keep in mind that we will be straining it more than it actually will be strained in a realistic scenario. So troubleshoot at your own risk. Of course, be careful with it and use your best judgment. But really, the best advice I can give is isolate areas of friction and remove that friction through filing and tweaking to get it to where it needs to be. If your worm gear is popping off, it does do that sometimes. What we can do later is we can focus on the direction that we have the motor spinning when we solder it all together. We'll have a look at that. But if your worm gear is popping off, what you can also do is you can put just a drop of super glue in the hole as you slide it on, and that should secure it pretty well. So you probably don't need to do many of those, but you will need to do some, likely, to get everything working properly. Now let's get into some soldering. I have the cage here. I've got it bolted down in my overkill vise just to hold it steady while I solder. I've got black wire here. I recommend that you guys follow along with the same color wire just so things move easier. What I'm going to do is I'm going to lay the black wire like so that the middle of the wire sits on these 2 prongs, an equal distance pointing out either side. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply mark the points that I want to strip the wire. This marker's pretty crummy. That's good enough. That's where I'm going to strip the wire and connect them to these rear 2 prongs. So I'll show you guys how I like to do it, but of course you don't have to do it this way. I like to take my wire strippers, give it a pinch there, slide it down, give it another pinch on the other side of my mark, and then if I bend it and peel, I can strip the specific spot that I wanted to open up. And then I'll do the same for my other marking, which I think I rubbed off. But yeah, that's the gist of it, is I'm going to open up the wire on those 2 spots. I'm going to tin and solder everything together, and we'll resume from there. What I already did, actually, because I had to flip things around, but what I did is I already have these 2 spots tinned as well as these 2 rear prongs tinned, and I'm going to connect the wire like so. So you can take your wire strippers and strip here and here, obviously open up that spot, and I'm going to have them bend like this. If they bend like this, there's not going to be much room in the housing later, so I want them to bend forward instead of backwards, because they'll just have to loop around and come back the other way in a minute. If you are soldering a dual stage Woozi, what I recommend that you do is you have one of these ends. You're probably going to need a little bit more wire, obviously, but one of your ends is simply going to loop around up to these top motors, and they're going to connect to the bottom prongs of those 2 top motors, just like back here, so they all spin the same direction, the correct direction. And then from here, you'll loop around and go back towards the center. I hope that made sense. I'll show it again in a minute after I get all these soldered in. There we are. Once again, a reminder for the dual stage is that it's going to bend like that and connect to the bottom prongs of those 2 motors, and then bend backwards towards the rest of the blaster. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the cage and I'm going to feed these black wires underneath this little bridge here. Now, a reminder, guys, this is just the way that I like to do it. It doesn't mean you have to feed all your wires in the exact same way that I am. In fact, there could very well be a better way to do this. This is just how I like to do it. This cage now is going to sit here, and we have these wires pointing this way because they need to fit into this little channel. And now I'm going to choose my longest one. In this case, I don't really have a longer one, and I'm just going to point this one out the battery slot here. It doesn't matter which one, as long as it's long enough. And I'm going to put my pusher assembly, and it's going to slide into and click nicely into this slot. You know we're in all the way when this orange tab sits against the plastic. That's how you know it's in all the way. And the other wire is going to feed back and connect to the pusher assembly. So I'm kind of just holding everything together here, but this wire is going to connect to either of these two prongs. Now, I already had a look at it, and if you're following along exactly as I am, what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect this black wire to the red dot, the red prong on this pusher. So I'm just going to kind of eyeball it, and I'm going to say, okay, about here is where I want to cut my cord. And then I'm going to strip that. I can take everything out now. I'm going to strip it, tin it, and connect it to my red prong. Alright, we've got everything back in place. I got this soldered up, and I can see that there's a little bit of slack in the cord, and that's okay. We actually we don't want things to be all tight when we put it all together. And I see that things are feeding through the channel just fine. So, we're good there. So that was the first bit of soldering. The black wire is pretty easy. It's only got a few pit stops to do. The red wire is going to be a bit of a different story. So the battery is going to be out here in the back. Let me see if I can visualize this at all in a helpful manner. So the battery is going to plug in here. The red wire is going to come inside, and it's going to make a pit stop at this switch. Keep everything in frame for you guys. Pit stop at this switch, then come out of the other side of the switch, and then it's going to need to tap into the two motors. Then from the motors, it's going to come out the front here, tap into this switch, and then come out the switch, and go back to the pusher. So a bit more complex, but we'll get through it. A heads up, I'm not going to be using a lot of heat shrink. I'm going to be using heat shrink mostly for the battery connection there, just because these internal ones, they don't really have a high risk of shorting at all. So just to save time and keep things moving, I'm going to skip on that part, but feel free to put heat shrink on yours, of course. So yeah, first, let's take this red wire and kind of match it with the distance of the black one. And the switch, we're just going to kind of quickly simulate where it is going to be. It is going to fit into this groove on the red plastic here. It's actually got a little bit of a cutout for it. And if I hold these at an equal distance, I see that the red wire meets up with this outer prong, the COM, I believe it's called, of this switch about right here. So that means that I want to trim the wire to be about that long. And then I'm going to strip and tin this, and I'm going to connect it to this piece pointing out backwards this way real quick. And with that connected, we'll throw on the remainder of our red wire. Strip, twist, and tin. And we are going to connect it to this prong here. So we're going to skip this one and put it on this one. So here we are. We've got the switch in place. We've got our wires coming out either direction. Like I said earlier, this wire needs to now feed to the motors. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to roughly estimate if this wire turns around and goes down this channel towards the motors. Now this is quite the circus act already, so it's going to be kind of hard to show. I'm going to try my best here. It's going to loop around just like that into that channel. And you can see it's already sticking out the bottom here. I need it to connect to those prongs. The open prongs on those motors. So already the wire's kind of falling into place. I know And I'm going to add a little bit of slack just to be safe. That about right here where I'm pinching is where I want to strip it for my first connection. Then I know that from there I can, then after I attach that, I can loop it around to the other connection, and I know that I'll be safe to cut and tin there. So I've got this pinched. That means that I can kind of disassemble this thing a little bit because I've already judged the distances. Here we are, gonna snip there, not cutting, but just stripping the wire because it's only making a pit stop there. I'm gonna tin this, and I am going to connect it to this prong here, and then after that I'm going to connect it to this prong up here. So let's do that. Okay, here we are. Not the prettiest thing I've ever soldered, but the point is we've got everything connected nicely. This wire we're actually going to need to extend a little bit in order for it to reach our next destination. So I'm going to, you'll see me in a moment, splice some more wire onto the end of this. But for now, let's just make sure that everything works in our housing. Tuck that in. Make sure all those wires are tucked neatly and they're not going to take any damage in there. Very good. And now if we spin this switch around to where it's going to be bolted down, we see that we have enough wire, and if we push the two battery wires out the back, we see that we are on a good track. Very nice. So like I said, I'm going to splice this one to be a little bit longer. Ideally, your red wire will be longer, or you'll have another one. Your hardware kit will have what is necessary. So I'm going to extend this, and then I'm going to get ready to connect it to this switch. While I'm here, and before I get too carried away, I'm actually going to take my 12mm, so that's the longest one, the 12mm shell screw, and I'm going to put it through this hole, which is then going to feed into the plastic. Now, it's only going to feed through a hair, so that means that you need to be ready, you need to pay close attention to how much it bites into the plastic, because if you turn it too much, it will strip. As you can see, it just barely sticks out there. That's all it's going to bite. So we just want to make sure that we bite it well and that we don't turn it too much. So I recommend doing this by hand and really feeling for it. And as soon as you feel it get snug, I would just leave it there, honestly. You don't want to go any more than you need to. So that's not going to jump anywhere for now. Okay, what's going to happen now is this switch is going to sit with the button pointing backwards in the blaster, is going to sit right here, bolted down against this gray plastic right handle. And this red wire is going to come down from up here as these two are attached. There we go. Is going to come down and attach to the switch. I might need to adjust where I ended up splicing this. This is a bit awkward. So I might do some adjustments there. Like I said, ideally you won't need to make those same adjustments because you'll have a longer wire than I will, or double the wire. Things will just have turned out differently. But what's going to happen here is I'm going to connect this red wire, and it doesn't actually matter which one we do, but I'm going to connect the wire to either of these prongs. I think I'll do the first one here. It's labeled NC on the switch, at least on my switch. Yeah, I think I'll connect it to that one. No, I'm going to do it the other way. I'm going to connect to the C back here. Like I said, it doesn't matter. You can do the first or the third, as long as you just do the outside ones. I'm going to connect to the back one, and then I'm going to take the rest of my wire and connect it to the NC. When we solder these, we want to make sure that our connections are nice and flat. We don't want to come straight in like this, because there's not really a lot of room right here for that kind of orientation. So we're going to solder it nice and flat, either like so, at a nice right angle to that prong, or I might even do it directly to the side of the prong. Hope that makes sense, but you'll see how it looks when I'm done. Okay guys, so this is retrospective and future Stuart talking, I actually made a mistake, and I wanted to quickly go over what I did wrong and help you guys fix it too. What I did is I did NC and C on my switch. You can see it just barely written there. NC and C. And if you have a switch that looks like this, it's got a red button, you'll also see the same labels. You'll see C and O and NC. What I was actually supposed to do is do C and NO. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave my C connected. I'm going to disconnect this one and put it onto NO. So hopefully you won't have already committed this mistake, but either way, here's how to fix it. So this is what we want. We want these two. If the button is pointing to the right, we want 2 and 3 prongs to be connected. You may have noticed by now that things are kind of falling apart as we're trying to work with them. And I have noticed the same thing. What I probably should have done earlier is I should have bolted these two pieces together. And to do so is pretty easy. Now, as for connecting the handle to this top panel here, you'll find a point at which everything just clicks into place nicely, which is just what we want. And I'm going to hold it there. And as you can see, there is a hole here and a hole here. As of right now, the screws that you'll be using for these two spots are half-length screws. Of course, this is subject to change. We may modify the files such that our screws fit better without needing to be cut in half. So yeah, just a half-length screw on each one. Okay, so I got the top and bottom secured. I ended up actually drilling this, and that's not a big deal. It had the room for it. I just did it so that way my screw fit. Got our 2 wires pointing out the back. Now, this switch, we don't have much depth in these holes here. So that means that we're going to be using half-length screws to bolt the switch down. We're just going to feed through the holes into the switch, into the holes in the plastic. However, I want to feed this wire through the back here and get it all the way. Wow, look at that first try. Lucky me. I want to get it all the way under the switch and out this side here. Whew. Just like that. If you need to, you can just, gently take the cage out. You can even remove the switch if you need to. Just get everything into that channel. We definitely don't want any wires on this side of the switch because our magazine is going to be there. We don't want the magazine to hook onto any wires and pull something we don't want pulled. So tucking that back in, let's secure this switch. I have a little bit of excess wire, and that is okay. Just need to make sure that it gets out of the way. So I'm just tucking it under there. So I got each bolt secured. I actually used the normal length ones, the ones that are 10 millimeters. I guess I lied about the half-length ones. Mine were a little bit too short, but you can always toy with them. But I used the full-length ones because actually we have a little bit of clearance on the other side, as you might have seen me check. If I can close this gap right here, then I know that I don't have too much protrusion in there. So there is actually a little bit of room for error. So even though the heads of my screws stick out the top a little bit, they are still in the plastic on the other side, and there is room for them to do so. So the switch is nice and secure. And by the way, double check, make sure that your button is pointed to the right and that the wires feed this direction. Okay, now we're getting on to a fun part, but we're almost done with the soldering, so that's the good news. Let's do this. We're going to pop out our pusher box, and we have this wire that came down here that is going to be for connecting to this pusher box. So if I pull this gently and make sure that I'm removing any excess slack in here, I see that I want this wire to connect to that prong about here. So I'm just going to give it a little bit of extra room though and snip it here. There we go. And then I'm going to strip and tin this and connect it to this prong. It is going to be a little tough because there's not much room in here. I also want to be careful not to accidentally touch the plastic with the soldering iron, of course. But yeah, we're just going to connect this to this. Okay, so we got that connected. Maybe in retrospect that wasn't the wisest way to do it. I imagine what you could do is you could connect it here. If you're having trouble, actually, you could connect it here, feed the wire this way, and then out down this way, and then connect it to the switch out here. Perhaps that's the wiser choice. Like I said, not perfect. But we've got that connected. We're tucking everything back into place now. Things are looking good. And the good news is if everything went right, we should only have to solder these two parts up here to our connector. If the wiring is correct, if you followed along, what's going to happen is black is going to fit into the negative slot on this XT60 connector, and red is going to fit into the positive slot. Just a quick tip for soldering these if you haven't before. I like to twist and tin this bit here on the wire, and then I like to put it in, and then I just kind of hold the soldering iron over the top here and then melt the two together. I hope that made sense, and maybe that comes in handy. But either way, I'm just going to knock this out. My red wire turned out a little long, so just for the sake of making it even, I'm going to snip it there. Very good. And I'm going to strip and tin and connect it to our XT60, and I'm also going to use heat shrink here. There we go, we've got that all connected up. Very good. So now that we have this done, and we have the switch secure and correct, let's start bolting everything together. We are done with soldering. If you followed along just right, and also saw the mistake that I made and corrected it, then you are good to go. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to tuck that wire out of the way and slip in my muzzle piece. It only goes one way, so do make sure that you put it in the right way. You'll see. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 5 screws and bolt down this cage. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And they're just going to be the normal screws, straight in and pretty decently tight. So we've got the cage nice and secure. What I like to do next is take a screw that is going to fit in this hole here and connect this orange to the red. A side note, I had to use a half-length screw up here, a pretty teeny one. I don't believe the hole was deep enough, but like I said, that's something that might change, so you might not even need to do that. Just do be aware. If you, at any point in this build, find that your screw just randomly stops going into its hole, it's probably bottomed out. And that means you should probably be using a half-length screw. So just pay attention to that. I don't know which ones exactly by memory are half-lengths still. So that's why sometimes after the fact I mention it. All right, so we've got this guy secure now, which is great. Let's move on. Now let's put in the trigger. The trigger is probably something we should have done earlier. But I'm just going to show you how you can still do it now. This trigger is going to have this shaft that it pivots on, which is going to connect to this hole, and then on the other side into this hole. However, I find that oftentimes these holes are just a little too tight, so I'm using a 1/4 inch drill bit. I'm just gently going in and out of each of those holes to verify that the trigger can spin freely in there. There we go. It's just what we want. Very good. Now, the trigger is going to actually have to push up under the cage and then feed into its hole and sit like so. And it's going to push back on its arm onto the switch. But we need to put a spring on it. So this is going to be a little tough, and I made it hard for no reason. I should have thought ahead. But if I feed it like this underneath the cage and then up into the top, I can actually hook this spring onto the hook there of the trigger carefully. Okay, got it. And then I immediately, as soon as I got it hooked, I immediately twisted the trigger this way. And now the spring is kind of halfway in there. Now let's take a half-length screw and let's put it into this third dot above the switch. Right there. And now we take the spring and hook it around that screw we just put in. Just like that. So now if we pull the trigger, we hear that switch disengage, which will then trigger the motors, which is just what we want. Very good. Okay, let's assemble one of my favorite features of the Woozi, and that's the mag release. I think it's a really clever design. We're going to be using these 3 little orange pieces, and it really helps to make sure before we put it all together that all of these pieces fit together nicely. So this peg fits in this hole, and that spins okay. And that this peg fits in this hole, and then that spins okay. So we have nice fits there. And we also want to check and make sure that when this piece fits into this slot, that it has freedom of movement back and forth. If it's not nice and clean and tidy, you may need to take a file in there or file to this and make it fit a little better. We have this little compression spring. I'm going to tuck it in behind, the mag release. To make things easier, I'm actually going to pull on this compression spring to extend it a little bit, so that way it doesn't fall out of place too easy and has a bit more oomph behind it. Very good. Now, carefully, I'm going to let the orange piece that we just put in fall out a little bit, so that way the peg can get out of the way. Oops, that's the wrong way. Just like that. And now we have this piece hooked on that peg. I hope that made sense, but either way, that's what we want. You can let the orange piece drift out of the way, feed this orange piece in, and then close it. Now, this piece comes in here, and these two connect. So something else came loose. There, got it all together. So it connects from that to that and that to that. I hope that made sense, and I hope you could see decently, but it's honestly not too hard to figure out as soon as you know the layout. From there, I'm going to take a screw that's going to feed into this hole, through the orange, and then back into the gray. So I already know I tightened it down too much because I can't move this lever anymore, so I'm just going to gently loosen that. There we go, it's back to its freedom of movement. Now I'm going to take another screw and put it up here on top. Just like that. Just sticking out a little bit. This spring is going to hook onto the orange and then hook onto that screw. So something came loose, I got to get that back into place. Okay, so we got it all put together. It's a little awkward right now because the spring pulls on it such that it ends up being kind of crooked, if that makes sense. But if I were to put my finger here and simulate the other half, we can push up on this lever and we see that it leaves the channel, allowing for the mag to release. I really like this mag release design. It feels really good when you have it all together. Now we take this big guy that we've been working so much on, and we are going to put the two together. Obviously the trigger hole lines up with that. And And if we close it up, we see that our mag release is still working just fine. And as you can see, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 connections to do. I believe that this hole down here is going to need, it's going to need a half length screw, this bottom left one. But the rest should be normal length. So let's throw it together. All right, so now that we've got the whole handle together, if we push up here, we should see that orange triangle get out of the way. Very good. And now if we pull the trigger, we should hear a single click at the very beginning. There's the click from the switch. And then if we continue to pull it, we hear another click. And that's this lever right here reaching down and pushing on the second switch that we installed. So this will be rev, and that'll be fire. So rev, fire. Nice. All right, so we're pretty much on the home stretch now. The rest of what we need to do is really just bolting it all together. This piece is obviously going to fit here, and then these two scales are going to fit on either side of the handle, and then this rail on top. It's pretty self-explanatory. I'm still going to mention a few things as I go, but basically the general rule is slide everything together, don't force anything, make sure everything's lining up, and then fill the holes with screws. And as you go, also make sure that you are using the correct screw. Like I said, some holes are going to require half-length screws, other holes are going to require full length. If you have a look beforehand, you'll realize which ones can be full and which ones can be half. It's just a matter of paying attention and also really pay attention to how it feels as you tighten it down. But as I've said a dozen times now, it's likely that we'll be making small modifications to these files such that you won't need to worry so much about checking for small screws. They should be mostly compatible with large screws. So I'm going to knock this out. Let's go. All right, okay, I got this left panel on, and it took a lot of screws. I also put on this back piece. You can actually have a back piece that's compatible with a Nerf stock, which is pretty cool. Don't forget these screws here. You do need those. They feed into the orange box on the inside. Then you've got, of course, these 4. Don't forget the 2 up front and the 2 underneath on front and back. And I think that was all of them. Now I'm going to do the scales. The scales, we're not going to use the black screws. We are going to use the itty bitty machine screws, these teeny guys. Oh, yeah, these guys. Do be careful not to strip them because, you know, they're small, the same old spiel. So let's throw on the scales. All right, awesome. We've got the scales on. They feel really great. Now, this rail up top, it only goes on one way. I believe most of these holes are half-length screws. So I'm going to use half-lengths for these. But yeah, it just fits on like this and secures nicely. Let's do it. Here we are, we've got the top rail on, our cable sticking out the side. All we need to do now is get our battery cover ready. So if we tuck this guy in here, this battery cover feeds into a little groove in here. There we go. It's a little tight, so I'm honestly going to file that to loosen it up a little bit. And I'm going to get a nice fit, and then I'm going to be able to fit the entire battery cover into its proper slot. Very good. I was able to put it in and then snap it closed. It tucks into here. Now, for this next bit, what you guys will receive is one of these little thumb screws. And the thumb screw is going to thread into the battery cover and then into the actual blaster. Now, what I'm actually going to cheat in a minute, what you can do is you can gently and patiently by hand, you can get this guy started. Just takes a little bit of pressure and a bit more of a steady hand than I have. Oh, almost. But you're going to feed it through there, and then it's going to feed into the other plastic. But like I said, I'm actually going to use a tap to make mine a little bit easier. Okay, so I got it tapped and got it fed in there just fine. Yeah, there's the Woozi. That was a fun build. I actually learned a lot doing it. It's been a little while since I've made one, and I haven't made a ton. But I'm really hoping that even though there was a hiccup here and there, I'm really hoping that this guide came in handy for you guys. And you guys were able to follow along and get yours to a working state. Alright, so I want to show you how I like to put a battery inside. There's a million ways to do this, obviously. This is a 1.5, so it can fit a pretty hefty battery. The goal is just to, be gentle, slip it in nicely, and then tuck the wires in. We want to make sure that we aren't pushing any wires in the way of the pusher, so I'm actually going to pull these back and out of the way. You'll just have to look in your own blaster and kind of see how things line up. And then we're just going to tuck the door back in. There we go. And then close it up. Really easy. I've said it before, I really like a blaster that has proper room for a battery. I don't like cramming them in there. It makes me nervous. So we've got the battery in there. Ours turned out a bit noisy. If we really wanted to, we could dive inside and we could have a look at the wheels and see how they're balanced. I'll actually at the end quickly mention how I like to balance them. Probably won't show you because it's a bit of a chore, but I've got a 20 round mag here. It's a little bit modified, as you can see. I think these are coming out soon. Throw that in there, a nice click. See that the mag release is working, and let's watch this magazine disappear. Okay, cool. Now that we've made a mag disappear and put darts everywhere, like I said, I want to quickly talk about balancing these flywheels. Our first batch of worker wheels were really great. They just went straight on and they balanced very nicely and were nice and quiet. This one is a little loud. However, it's not the end of the world. It's still going to perform just fine. Maybe we could squeeze a little bit more performance out of it if we were to balance the wheels, and we would have a little less heat build up. But in general, if yours makes a little bit of noise, it's not the end of the world. You can honestly probably leave it as is. However, if it does make you a little uncomfortable, if it is like that, you can balance the wheels. What I recommend when you do that is you put the wheel on the motor and you spin the wheel while holding the motor completely still. If you can vice it down, or if you can just have it somewhere steady on the table, that's a really great idea. And if you pay very close attention as you spin the wheel on the motor, holding the motor completely still, you may notice a side in which the wheel seems to be lopsided. It does happen, and sometimes it can actually be quite obvious. So if your wheels are pretty noisy, chances are if you take it apart again and you spin your wheels, you'll notice one side that is lopsided. I don't think I have an unbalanced wheel to show you guys. Yeah, I don't have one here on me. But the point is you should be able to see a slight lopsidedness. Then what you do is I would just put a dot with a Sharpie or something, or take a mental note of where that lopsided edge was. That means that's the heavy side. If that's the heavy side, then that side needs to be made lighter, so that way it can balance the wheel. So if I notice that along where it's printed worker here, I see that that side kind of bulges as I turn it around. It's lopsided that way. what you can do is you can turn it around under here, and you can take a knife and you can gently shave out a little bit of plastic. I like to use this little deburring tool that we have, and you can literally just shave out a little bit of plastic. I'm not going to on this one because I don't know if this wheel's balanced or not, but you can shave out a little bit, and then you can put the wheel back on and try it again, and it might sound a little better. And if it's sounding better but not great enough, then you can go and do it again. I was able to do this successfully a couple times now, so I just wanted to put it out there and let you know that if yours is pretty unbalanced, chances are that you can balance it if you do so carefully. Just take your time and pay close attention to how it feels as you go. But there is the Woozi. I really like it. At the last Nerf event that I went to, there was a Woozi there, and it tagged me like 4 times in a row. It's a great blaster. It doesn't have like crazy range, but it is a fully automatic high power flywheeler, and it will get the job done. It's very comfortable. It's a great sidearm. I really like the mag release system here. Very comfortable, ergonomic, and just feels good, and they can be quite reliable, honestly. There are a couple of cosmetics that you can get. Like I said, you can get the box stock attachment thing for Nerf blaster stocks, or you could even have different muzzle variants. And there's nothing very different about those. They just look different. But the stock, of course, lets you throw on a stock. But yeah, a great blaster, very great design. Mag release is my favorite part. Highly recommend that you go grab one if you're looking for a really stylish and great and reliable sidearm, or run it as a primary, honestly. Anyways, I hope this helped. Like I said, there were a few hiccups, but I'm hoping that this puts you in the right direction at the very least. Thanks for watching, everybody, and take care.